Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending upon where you're watching from. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I warmly welcome you on behalf of the members of our leadership team, which includes former Congressman Mel Levine and former Los Angeles County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. Thank you and welcome to our guest, Aaron David Miller, for once again joining us to help us remain as informed as possible about the complicated situation in Israel, Gaza, and the Middle East. And now with this week's political news, there's even more to learn about future U.S. foreign policy, as well as the impact of this week's events in Washington on foreign policy and on possible ceasefire. So a big thank you to Aaron. Welcome, and thank you also to our wonderful moderator, Warren Olney. Once again, as it seems happens every week, it's been a head-spinning week of critical news. This Wednesday, Congressman Adam Schiff will give us his perspective from the Hill during these very tumultuous times. I just want to remind everyone that our mission at American at a Crossroads is to present speakers within certain limits who have credible, intelligent voices which we think have something important to add to the conversation transpiring in our country today. It is not important that you or I or anyone agree with any of our speakers. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with the mission of providing speakers who promote democracy and who actively oppose authoritarian, anti-democratic perspectives. So of course, we welcome your emails, but realize that you don't have to agree with the speaker to listen, understand, and learn. We hope you'll join us next week with this Wednesday, with Adam Schiff, and then next week for Bill Kristol and his fellow Bulwark journalist, Andrew Egger, who replaced Charlie Sykes at Morning Shots, the Bulwark daily newsletter. At the bottom of each email, including the one you'll get it right after tonight's program, is a list of 5 or 6 programs with registration links. And we just added one in the middle of all that on August 12th with David Frum. So be sure to inspect what's at the bottom of the email. Also, I ask you to check your spam or junk for the Zoom link emails if you don't get them. If they aren't in your inbox, 90% of the time, you will find them in your spam or junk folder. Then if you still can't find them, let me know, send me an email, and I will send you a link. Judge, as I said, is a non-profit organization. We alert you, we're also nonpartisan. We alert you that under the activism tab on our website, we have all kinds of nonpartisan volunteer opportunities for you, mostly related to voter protection, voting rights, and voter registration. If you want to get involved, go to our website, find an organization. We vetted them all. One of them surely will suit you. All of our programs are available via podcast and via our YouTube channel and via our website. Links to past programs are in every email we send. Just look in the email for it. If you go to any email, you'll also find the links to our website and to the podcast link. So we encourage you to send our links and emails to your friends, especially as November election nears. We'd love to be able to reach as many people as possible. So your help with that would be greatly appreciated. Now to introduce tonight's guest and moderator, please welcome my friend and fellow leader of America at a Crossroads, former Congressman Mel Levine. Mel?
Thanks very much, Janice. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Aaron David Miller this evening, and we warmly welcome his return. I was trying to recall in thinking about this introduction how long I've known David. I know it's more than 50 years, probably not much more than 50 years, but I think we first met maybe 51 years ago. And during certainly the first 20 years of that time, when I was a member of Congress working on Middle East issues a lot, I relied substantially on input from Aaron, which was always objective, thoughtful, and accurate. And I very early learned to respect him greatly and to like him a great deal, and I have felt that way for more than half a century. In order to not take too much time from the actual presentation, I'm just going to summarize what has been an extraordinary career for Aaron during those years. Aaron served in the State Department for 24 years, where he served 6 secretaries of state as an advisor on Israel-Arab negotiations, participating in American efforts to broker agreements between Israel, Jordan, Syria, and the Palestinians. He served subsequently as president of Seeds of Peace from 1204 2103 to 2106. And after 2206, he joined the Woodrow Wilson Center. He has written 5 books. And as I said earlier, he is a highly regarded expert on Middle East issues for whom I have the greatest of respect. We are extremely fortunate to again have superstar moderator Warren Olney interviewing Aaron. As most of you already know, Warren is a multiple award-winning broadcast journalist who has been the star host and executive producer of the nationally syndicated public radio weekday program To the Point for decades, as well as the host of KCRW's Which Way LA for 25 years. He has received countless awards, including the annual Distinguished Journalism Award, which he received twice. We are very lucky and grateful that he moderates many of our programs, and I turn this one over to Warren.
Mel, thank you very much, and I appreciate that flowery introduction. I'm sure that Aaron David Miller does as well. And Aaron David Miller, it's great to talk with you. It's been a long time. You were on my program in the past, and it's been a while. So it's great to have you as a companion once again in a broadcast production.
Thanks so much. And a shout out to Janice, to Zev, and to Mel for having me back. Mel, I think we first met in the late 70s. Lindsay and I showed up in Washington in 76. Back in the day, we had a fair amount of interaction, and my respect and affection for you is mutual, Mel. It really is. I only miss some of our conversations. And Warren, thank you again. I was fortunate to be on your show a fair number of times over the years. And I appreciated everything that you do, your penetrating questions, and your grace and style as a moderator.
Well, you're very kind. And what I appreciate is the extraordinary experience that you bring to the subjects that we discuss and the insights that you are able to transmit to us. So I think we're going to have a great time tonight. And there's a lot to talk about. It's a very crowded calendar, to say the least, if you're trying to keep track of what's going on in a public way. So why don't we start with Prime Minister Netanyahu? He's coming to this country. He's going to be here tomorrow. He's going to be here on Wednesday. He was invited by the Republican leadership in the Congress. Remind us, if you will, about the circumstances of the invitation. And tell us, what do you think it is that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to accomplish?
Terrific questions. The invitation was originally conceived of by Mike Johnson, the House Majority Leader. But clearly, he also had in mind the possibility that the Democrats would also be drawn into this exercise. And I think, quite to some people's surprise, both Majority Speaker or Leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and Hakeem Jeffries signed on. So what essentially you have is a Republican Party that has emerged as the sort of Israel can do no wrong party, and a deeply divided Democratic Party, increasingly polarized between mainstream moderate and progressives, all of whom are debating, I think, one central question, and that is what does it mean for a Democrat to be pro-Israel today? I mean, I don't think I'm stretching the bounds of credulity to the breaking point to assume that Mike Johnson, part of it was to put the Republicans in a box, the Democrats in a box, and to create a situation where, in rejecting joint invitation to address Congress, the Republican Party, and again, I voted for Republicans and I've worked for Republicans, just to clear the boards on this question. And it's been my view for decades that the dividing line for an effective foreign policy is not between left and right, liberal or conservative, or Republican and Democrat. It's between dumb on one hand and smart on the other. And the only thing that matters is which side of the line do you want America to be on, smart side or the dumb side? If it's the smart side, then you believe in something called the American national interest, which transcends party, personal affiliations. And I do think, however, as we all know, that politics can be a strange, willful, and extremely dark game at times. So I think the Speaker Johnson wanted to create a situation where if the Democrats refused, the Republican Party would be seen and portrayed, as Speaker Johnson referred to just last week, as the only, quote, pro-Israel party in Washington. It's also worth reminding people that this will be the fourth time that the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, now the longest governing Prime Minister in the history of the State of Israel, will address a joint session, besting Winston Churchill. He's also been here twice the number of times of Nelson Mandela and the late Yitzhak Rabin. So I think in the segue in answering the question about what Mr. Netanyahu wants to achieve, I think by and large, this visit has much more to do with politics than policy, his politics and our politics. And I think timing-wise, unfortunately for the Prime Minister, if I'm reading his calculations correctly, he showed up possibly at the worst time, because this visit coincided with a rather dramatic announcement by President Biden of his withdrawal from the race. And the visit's going to be overshadowed by that, even in Israel, I suspect. The uncertainty about meetings right now. The White House is still not confirmed today. Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, will not be, as president of the Senate, will not be sitting behind the Prime Minister when he addresses Congress on Wednesday. She'll be off campaigning. There is a meeting planned, again, no date set, later in the week for the Prime Minister and Vice President Harris. So I think Mr. Netanyahu's objective is to demonstrate indispensability. It was de Gaulle who claimed that the graveyards of France were filled with indispensable people. In the case of Mr. Netanyahu, I'm persuaded that he does believe he is indispensable. And part of this is driven by Israeli politics. Part of it also, I think, is his effort to navigate a very fine line between the current administration and now with the withdrawal of the president from the race, and we only have one president at a time. And President Biden will be president until the next inauguration in January. Mr. Netanyahu cannot afford to completely alienate President Biden, given Israel's security challenges. And he certainly doesn't want to alienate a possibly putative president, Kamala Harris. But he also is here on another mission, and that is to find a way to mend the ties, repair the ties with former President Trump. He's requested a meeting. They've had almost no contact since, how can I put this delicately? The former president's expletive when he learned that the Prime Minister had sent a video congratulating President Biden on his election. So there are fences to be mended, and I suspect, given the importance of the Republican Party to Mr. Netanyahu's politics in Israel, I think that mission, in a way, becomes as important as any sit down he's going to have either with the Vice President or President Biden.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but Warren and everybody, can you speak a little more loudly? There are some people who are having trouble hearing. Thank you.
I'm sorry, how's this? Am I speak like this? Is that?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you. Closer to the
Okay, I
mic.
appreciate that. Thank you, and I can do that. So this is the worst time. How have relations been between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden? They haven't been all that smooth, I gather, even though, of course, President Biden is taking heat from a lot of people in the Democratic Party for being excessively supportive of the war in Gaza.
You know, I think as I look back on administrations that I've worked for, presidents, and they each bring a different sensibility to the White House. I think it goes without saying that during the course of the last 10 months, you've seen a demonstration of Joe Biden's extraordinary commitment, which even transcends politics, and perhaps his own political interests, an extraordinary commitment to the security, to the idea, and to the people of Israel in the wake of the October 7 Hamas terror surge and what's followed in Gaza over the course of the last 10 months. I think Biden has demonstrated, and he describes himself as a non-Jewish Christian Zionist. He has demonstrated a remarkable commitment to Israel in a time of extraordinary trauma. I think the president, somewhere, perhaps during the first 2 or 3 months of the Gaza war, began to realize that he was not dealing with the Benjamin Netanyahu that he thought he knew over the course of the last 30 years. The risk-averse Benjamin Netanyahu, who was very careful with respect to steps that he would take that would be outside of the Israeli mainstream, extremely careful, highly risk-averse when it came to projecting Israel's military force. The Netanyahu that would take a step forward, a step to the side, a step backward. He began to understand that he was dealing not with a risk-averse Benjamin Netanyahu, but with a risk-ready Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think as a consequence of that, not as a consequence of differences over strategic war aims, I think the Biden administration has tethered itself to Israel's war aims, where it began to break down and where I would argue you had a crisis of confidence and trust between the two, is over the difference in tactics of how to wage the war in Gaza, and an increasing suspicion on the part of the president that the prime minister had begun to conflate his own political future with what he regards as the best way to prosecute this war. And I think you did have, you have now, a crisis of confidence. There was a determination, I think, on the part of the Biden administration not to create a sustained breach, not to create a situation where you didn't have a functional relationship with the Israeli prime minister and with the Israeli government. But I think it's been made abundantly clear to Joe Biden that he's not dealing with the same Benjamin Netanyahu that he thought he knew, and that political calculations, prolonging the war, resisting American entreaties about discussing the proverbial day after the war, dealing with and pressing the Israelis to focus more on the humanitarian situation with respect to Gaza. All of these things have created the sense that Mr. Netanyahu is much more interested in prolonging the war and in effect holding on to power than he is bringing it to a conclusion. And I think that more than anything else has created I've referred to the issue of crisis of confidence, but you need a modicum of trust between a president and an Israeli prime minister. And I think by and large, even though the president still believes that negotiating a Israeli-Hamas deal remains the only way to extricate not only the United States from this war, but to create a situation where hostages are returned, humanitarian assistance can surge into Gaza, and maybe bring the war to a conclusion. But I think the damage has been done, and it remains to be seen as we move forward toward November, whether or not the maintaining of this functional relationship with the Israelis will be possible.
How different do you think Vice President Harris is from President Biden, excuse me, on Israel? And what about Donald Trump? Do we know what his policies are? Does Netanyahu have a sense of what he wants to hear? Trump wants to hear from Netanyahu.
The vice president is a moderate mainstream Democrat who I think has moderate mainstream views with respect to the state of Israel. I think it's a foregone conclusion, as most American politicians committed to Israel's security, understanding the precarious neighborhood in which the Israelis live. But she's of a different generation. Let's be clear. I think that's one of the reasons that the president's announcement has created the energy, the excitement, and the enthusiasm that it has, largely among Democrats, and perhaps some concern among Republicans. But on the issue of Israel, I do believe, because it's a generational issue, and because she does not have the history with the state of Israel, with the idea of the state of Israel that Joe Biden has, that her views on Mr. Netanyahu, on Israeli settlement policy, on Palestinians are going to be, how can I describe this, a bit edgier and perhaps tougher. The real question, though, and I think I saw this in the Obama administration, when I was told early on in the administration that Obama would be a different kind of president, that Obama was going to create a different kind of relationship with Israel, one that was much tougher. There would be an imposition of costs and consequences for Israeli behavior that the administration did not like. All of that fell by the wayside in the face of policy and political constraints. And I suspect that Kamala Harris, should she become president, will more or less be dealing with the same political and policy constraints of any American president, nor is she going to be interested in the first year of a Harris administration to pick a fight or even react in a way that would break with an Israeli government and an Israeli prime minister. But you're going to hear a different tone from Kamala Harris. There's no question about it. You're going to hear a more empathetic tone when it comes to Palestinian rights and Palestinian suffering and the critically important notion of humanitarian assistance. Whether or not, and I wouldn't prejudge this, although I've been around the block and I've watched American presidents and their secretaries of state deal with Israel, I still find it difficult to believe that there will be an abrupt shift or departure from the Biden administration's reluctance, great reluctance, to impose significant or serious costs on Israel as a consequence of Israeli policies that the administration does not like. So I think moderate mainstream Democratic leader, perhaps without Joe Biden has an extraordinary, the love of Israel is deeply imprinted on his emotional and on his political DNA. And the vice president is married to the second gentleman. He may become the first gentleman. And there's no doubt that she cares and feels deeply about the state of Israel. But I do believe that Kamala presidency, Harris presidency, will have a different edge when it comes to reacting to Israeli policies that seem, perhaps in her judgment, to undermine and that do undermine American national interests.
What about Donald Trump?
Well, we've seen dress rehearsal. All presidents are blind dates in a sense. We really don't know them all that well. We can look at their careers, their resumes, but in a sense, they're blind dates. And you only understand the mettle, the character of a president in the office itself. We've seen 4 years of Donald Trump in the White House on foreign policy and on his relationship with Israel. And I'd only repeat a conversation I had with Jared Kushner in 2018. He was kind enough to reach out to me to see if I had any advice I could offer them on Arab-Israeli, Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking. Listening was not one of Mr. Kushner's greatest skills. And I found myself, frankly, and it was all to the good as far as I was concerned, listening to Jared Kushner. And what Jared Kushner said in 2018 proved to be the outlines of his father-in-law's policies. Number one, that he would make it impossible for any Israeli prime minister to say no to his father-in-law. Number two, he would seek to establish strategic relations with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And number three, As concerned the Palestinian issue, the Palestinians were the weakest party in this negotiation. They need to they need to understand that they are the weakest party. In the words of Mr. Trump's, one of Mr. Trump's attorney, who was in the room at the time, said that if the Palestinians don't agree to what we propose, they'll get 50 cents on the dollar. If they delay, it'll be 25 cents. And if they delay further, it'll be nothing. Those three elements, frankly, pretty accurately characterize the 4 years that Donald Trump was in the Oval. In my judgment, and again, I'm just reporting here, he created, in many respects, what I would describe to you as a sugar high for Israel. He did things, both in terms of gestures and policies, in an effort to demonstrate that he was the most pro-Israeli president in the history of the universe. We could argue all day long about what it means to be pro-Israeli if you're an American president. What kind of commitment and responsibilities does that involve if you really do care about the well-being and security of the state of Israel? But there's no doubt that Israelis appreciated all of these gestures. And he created, to some degree, a kind of Vulcan mind meld with Benjamin Netanyahu. But as we would later learn, there had been a falling out. And now, it seems, the onus is on Mr. Netanyahu to try to repair and mend ties. I would venture to say, if Benjamin Netanyahu could vote in this republic, that between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump on November 5th, he'd be pulling the lever for Mr. Trump.
You mentioned the potential for a ceasefire. Secretary of State Blinken said last week that the agreement to release the hostages and negotiate a ceasefire was inside the 10-yard line. He also said that sometimes the last 10 yards are the hardest. How close do you think it is? I mean, he made it sound like it might happen tomorrow.
Right. You know, I do like sports metaphors and analogies when it comes to negotiations. I use them all the time. I would prefer a baseball metaphor, but be that as it may, in my experience in Middle East negotiations, they have two speeds, slow and slow. And I think what we've watched over the past 6 to 8 months should remind us not only of the complexity of these issues, but the peculiarity of this particular negotiation. I mean, the key Palestinian decision maker, Yahya Sinwar, the architect of the October 7 Hamas terror surge, is ensconced somewhere below Khan Yunis, in Egypt, perhaps, in Sinai, in a tunnel, making decisions, how they're communicating with him, how he's getting messages to the external Hamas leadership that is negotiating in Cairo and in Doha, is a mystery. There's no trust and no confidence, obviously, between Hamas and Israel. These negotiations are being done through cutouts. There are any number of other parties involved, the Egyptians, the Qataris, the Americans, all who have their own interests with respect to negotiating a ceasefire. But it's absolutely elemental, I think, for everyone to understand that over the last 10 months, there is no external party, not the UN, not the US, not the G7, not the ICJ, not the ICC, that has fundamentally succeeded in altering the trajectory of this conflict. And in a way, it is as it must be. Two major combatants, Israel and Hamas, both who perceive each in their own way this to be an existential struggle, are literally resistant to the kinds of external pressures that might occur in a normal negotiation. And the fact that Israel is negotiating with an organization whose raison d'etre is the replacement of the state of Israel with an Islamic state makes this negotiation from the standpoint of the mediator, particularly the United States, really fraught. It's an organization that committed sexual predation, mutilation, torture, the taking of hostages, 120, 45 to 50, the Israelis assess are no longer alive. Their bodies taken on October 7 to Gaza to trade, or they died in captivity. So these two parties will be the determinants of whether or not a deal is in the offing. I would argue to you that right now we probably have the best chance of reaching an agreement. Hamas is under significant pressure. My friend and former colleague Bill Burns, in a closed-door session in Sun Valley, which CNN reported on, basically admitted that clearly based on the agency's analysis that Hamas commanders are under great pressure. They need relief. They want a ceasefire. The IDF, clearly, senior leadership wants to do a deal that relieves a lot of the pressure on the IDF, will allow the Israelis to prepare and concentrate on the northern front, and of course, the moral and ethical redemption of living and dead hostages, including 8 Americans. It's critically important to this deal. I would venture a guess that if it's going to happen, it'll happen after Mr. Netanyahu returns home. The Knesset goes into recess on July 28. It is not due back until after the Jewish holidays, roughly 2 weeks or so before our elections. It is very difficult to bring a government down either with a constructive vote of no confidence or a simple vote of no confidence when the Knesset is out of session, which means that if Benjamin Netanyahu is looking for an opportunity to do this deal and to constrain the 2 problematic ministers who have vowed to bring the government down, the time to do this deal is between the end of the Knesset summer recess on July 28th and sometime in August. Whether it'll get done or not is unclear. On Thursday, the Israeli negotiating team is returning to Doha to respond to the multiple comments of Hamas has made on what is essentially an Israeli proposal. If there is a deal, and I really, really hope that there is a deal, the bad news is that I doubt whether or not it'll move beyond phase 1, which is a 6-week ceasefire, a limited exchange of hostages for an asymmetrical number of Palestinian prisoners, a period of quiet of 6 weeks that Gaza has never experienced since October 7. I say this only because I do not believe that it is possible to reconcile Hamas's endgame, which is survival, and the capacity to influence the politics in Gaza in the post-conflict environment, not to govern Gaza. Those days are probably over. But Hamas will emerge as an insurgency with the power to intimidate and probably to co-opt whatever or whoever emerges as a governing mechanism in Gaza. That objective is simply mutually irreconcilable to Israel's determination to deny Hamas, having destroyed its organized military capacity and its ability to do another October 7. The Israelis want more. They want to undermine, and it's understandable, and I think the President of the United States holds this view as well, that Hamas should not be able to play a substantial role in post-conflict Gaza. It just doesn't, it's just not reconciled with reality. It's a judgment for a galaxy far, far away, not for the realities back here on planet Earth. And because these goals are irreconcilable, I think they'll probably move through phase 1. But it seems to me, even if it's at a reduced level, the conflict in Gaza is going to continue.
You mentioned the military action in the north. There's an article, I think it's just published today in the New Yorker, quoting a Hezbollah leader as saying that Hezbollah is really only interested in what's going on in Gaza, but that Iran really wants them to continue to attack Israel. Do you think that will continue? And then what about the Houthis as well? We don't have a lot of time left, but it seems to me Israel is being attacked from all sides at this point, even more than usual.
I'd recommend the Dexter Filkins article in the New Yorker. It's really very good. It's on the ground reporting. Look, I think it's been 18 years since the summer of 2006, since the last Israeli-Hezbollah war, where 5,000 guys with relatively low caliber, high trajectory weapons shut down the northern half of Israel for 33 days. This war, which would involve the potential daily rate of missiles of some 3,000 per day out of 150,000 high trajectory weapons of varying ranges, precisions, and lethalities, which can cover the state of Israel. And the Israeli either preemption or counter, which would leave a path of destruction in Lebanon, southern Lebanon, Beirut, the southern suburbs. The number of civilian deaths and casualties on the Lebanese and Israeli side of an all-out major conflict, not to mention the possibilities of its spread, the possibilities that the Middle East will experience something it's never experienced before, a regional war, which could include an Israeli-Iranian sustained confrontation. And if that happens, it's almost certain that the United States would be involved. I don't think Hezbollah wants a major war. I think the Iranians are prepared to fight the Israelis to the last Hamas and Hezbollah fighter, but I do not believe Tehran, particularly now during this transition, wants a major conflict. The Biden administration does not want a major conflict. And I think, even though there are planners and strategic analysts in the IDF who believe that such a war might be inevitable, I don't think that the IDF wants it now. And I would bet that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want it either. We've had 10 months of a potential escalatory cycle. Literally, Hezbollah attacked Israel on October 8th. Every single day, there have been exchanges, some of them deeper into Israel and into Lebanon. And yet, risk aversion, not risk readiness, seems to pertain. I think, and again, Middle East wars don't happen by accident. They can happen as a consequence of misperceptions, where one side acts in a way that they believe is non-escalatory, and it sets off a cycle. I still think there's a reasonable chance that between now and the end of the year, I would not go further than that you can get out of this without a major escalation. As far as the Houthis are concerned, they are here to stay. According to some, they are the southern Hezbollah. Unlike Hezbollah, they actually control the better part of an actual country. They have access to oil reserves, which is one of the reasons the Israelis struck Hodeidah, the port, the oil refinery and infrastructure, in response to the one drone, which flew 1,300 miles and struck central Tel Aviv, killing one and wounding several. So all of these things are threads which could be woven as the longer the Israeli-Gaza war goes on into a pattern of major regional escalation. I think there's, again, a fair chance that if there is a ceasefire, the Northern Front will return to some measure of calm.
The drone that hit in Tel Aviv, as you said, went over 1,000 miles. In response, there was a bombing by Israel, and it was said that it was the longest bombing raid that Israel had ever conducted. How much longer is that going to go on, or how much more often do you think it's possible for that to continue?
It's a good question. I was told by one of my Israeli friends that it's actually not the longest raid that the Israelis undertook. In 1985, they struck Tunis in an effort to take out senior PLO leaders. But your point is right. I mean, is it another front? it won't be a front like Israel-Gaza or the northern border, Israel-Lebanon, but it demonstrates a certain amount of vulnerability. And it demonstrates the erosion. I think the Israelis are concerned about Israeli deterrence. I think there's no question about that. Had that drone killed more people, you could have gotten an escalation. And I think that again, I think is another compelling reason to try, to the degree that's possible, to at least get through the first phase of this agreement and a 6 week ceasefire. Gaza hasn't experienced that since October 6th. And it might be possible to build on that six week ceasefire in order to envision some end state that wouldn't involve major Israeli ground ops, a huge humanitarian disaster in Gaza, and the exponential rise of Palestinian deaths and injuries.
Janice, do you have questions from the audience? I don't see any on the.
Yes,
the
they're all
screen.
in the, they're all in the chat, Warren.
Oh, I beg your pardon, of course.
If you can't find them, I'm happy to
Sure,
post
no,
them.
no, I've got it. Can you please discuss this is from David. Can you please discuss the recent vote or resolution of the Knesset against Palestinian state? Is it true that there were no Jewish legislators who voted against this?
No Jewish legislators who voted against it.
That's what the questioner says. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It was 60. I mean, it was 68 votes for. I'm not sure where Lapid and Lapid's party was. It may be correct. Look, if you ask me, and you did, it's in some respect a nod to the prime minister's base. The odds that a Palestinian state would be created anytime soon, and even later, in the wake of October 7th, in my judgment, a slim to none, and slim as left town. And the reality is, it's very difficult for me to sort of grasp how, in the wake of October 7th, assuming you got a cessation of hostilities, you could begin to create the kinds of space that is required and muster the kind of leadership on both the Israeli and Palestinian sides that would be necessary in order even to begin again to engage in the 90s, even in the early aughts, even as late as 2014, on the 5 or 6 core issues that need to be resolved if you were ever to see a conflict-ending solution. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, 2 states, borders, security, refugees, Jerusalem, and the end of all conflict and claims. Those 5 issues, the gaps on those 5 issues when we were at Camp David in July of 2000 were as wide as the Grand Canyon, wider. And the gaps on those issues today are galactic in scope. And my fear, and again, I'm 75, I got 2 40-year-old kids. It's not for me to say never. I don't have that right. It's morally unconscionable. I occupy a space on this planet for a tiny, very short period of time. I still believe that a conflict-ending solution between Israelis and Palestinians is possible, but it seems to me that when this is done, Israelis and Palestinians are going to say to one another, it's not that we don't understand one another. That's not the problem. The problem is that we understand each other only too well. And in order to provide a counter trauma, just one diversion. Lindsay and I, my wife Lindsay and I, were in Jerusalem on October 6th, 1973. Until now, that was the greatest trauma the state of Israel had ever faced. 2,800 Israeli soldiers killed, an intelligence failure which resulted 8 months later, in April of 74, in the resignation of then Prime Minister Golda Meir, not because she was identified as responsible for the intelligence failure, but public pressure. And yet within 3 weeks of that war, Nixon and Kissinger had created space for a ceasefire. And within 4 years of that war, I watched Sadat, Begin, and Carter on the White House lawn sign a full treaty of peace. Where is the counter trauma to October 6th, which goes beyond anything in terms of trauma, violence, cruelty, punishing deaths, not just on Israel, not just the taking of hostages, not just the deaths of Israeli civilians, but tens of thousands of Palestinians who have been killed. Where is the counter trauma that Sadat and Begin provided in the wake of the last most serious trauma? I can't identify. And that, I think, is the basic problem.
I want to put this next question in this context. The Secretary of State also indicated last week that he thinks Iran is within a few days of having enough fissile material to power a nuclear weapon. So Frank wants to know, many believe one of the biggest causes of the tensions between Bibi and Obama and Biden are now how the U.S. president manages Iran and its nuclear aspirations, and what is Harris likely to do with regard to Iran?
You mean if Harris wins the election and it's 2025, how is the United States going to deal with the reality that Iran is weeks away from enough fissile material, enriched uranium, in order to have enough fuel for a weapon? Now, that doesn't mean they have a weapon.
Sure.
They need a physics package. You need to miniaturize the warhead. But let's, for the sake of argument, let's just say they're 2 years away. And let's say they do it illicitly without the knowledge of either Israeli intelligence, the IAEA, or American intelligence. We have a strategic problem with Iran, and we do not have a strategic solution. And I admit that freely. All you can do, given the nature of this regime, is to come up with management fixes which try to delay and postpone weaponization. And by the way, any new deal with Iran is going to have to include not just an agreement on the nuclear issue. It's going to have to deal with Iran's proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria. It's just hard for me to imagine that the sun, the moon, and the stars are going to realign, which would allow President Harris, even if she decided that this was an issue that she needs to undertake, without a fundamental alteration in the way the regime, heavily ideological, and yet in some respects deadly pragmatic, without a fundamental change in Iran's view of itself and the region and the US, the best you're going to be able to do is to manage. The best you're going to be able to do is postpone, because all of the solutions to somehow end Iran's nuclear program just aren't available. Regime change, very tough to imagine. A military strike, sure, you can do that, and we could probably do it much more in a much more devastating way than the Israelis. But it's also, to use the Israeli expression, it's mowing the grass. The grass is going to grow back. Any nation that's attacked, including ours, the first instinct is not to roll over. It's to get even. And the reality is once scientific knowledge enters the consciousness of a scientific community, how do you purge it? The only way to purge it is to somehow change the acquisitive interest that Iran has in remaining a screwdriver's turn away, figuratively speaking, from weaponizing. And frankly, I have very little confidence in our capacity to stop Iran from getting a weapon by the use of military force, clandestine operations to somehow change the regime, or negotiation. The best you can do with Iran is transaction. You cannot do transformation without a fundamental change in the regime. It's not pretty. It's not emotionally satisfying. Some would argue it's defeatist, but I just don't see how you do it. And Iran is going to emerge as a major challenge for the next administration, perhaps even over the next 6 months of this one.
Question from Robert. Do the settlers carrying out attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank have the tacit support of Netanyahu and the government of Israel?
I mean, I think the questioner probably knows the answer to the question. I mean, this Israeli government, the most extreme and right-wing in Israel's history, with two ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, with big budgets, ideological aspirations, and the acquiescence of the current Israeli government, are committed and pledged to one strategic objective, and that is to annex the West Bank in all but name, and perhaps even if given the opportunity, in name as well. So the answer is yes. The answer is the prime minister who formed this government, which was not to his liking, as a consequence of having to remain in power. And I think that's something that we're hesitant to conclude. We don't want to talk about it. But the reality is, on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in a Jerusalem district court for 4 years running, due to testify in December of this year. The reality for Benjamin Netanyahu, politics and political survival, is the organizing principle, because it's an existential issue. It's not just a question of legacy. It's ultimately and theoretically a matter of his personal freedom. Ehud Olmert went to jail 14, 15 months, former Israeli prime minister, for one of the charges that Benjamin Netanyahu faces. So he either stays in power and finds a way to maneuver around the judgment, or if he loses power, he faces the prospects of a plea deal, which I suspect would have on the government's end, or the end of the attorney general, the end of his political career. So this, to him, is existential. And that means the only number that counts here is 64. There's no effective opposition in Israel that's capable of unseating Benjamin Netanyahu, not Benny Gantz, not Yair Lapid. It's 64. And as long as he has 64, he can enable and does enable and pays Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in annexationist coin in order to retain their confidence and their loyalty. And I'm analyzing here. I'm not advocating.
Paul has what amounts to a follow-up question. He says Netanyahu's intent on continuing Israel's settlement policy, which is illegal. I would point out the International Court of Justice has declared it illegal and said that Israel ought to stop the settlements in that region and pay reparations as well, although I don't know if they could specify them. So the question then Paul wants to ask is, do you think that we will ever achieve peace given that policy?
Well, the reality is that if we're talking about peace between Israelis and Palestinians, we're talking about the future disposition of the 15 million humans, and I'll use between the river and the sea here in a heuristic educational way, not as a piece of propaganda. Between the river and the sea, or the sea and the river, there are 15 million humans. What is the future of these 15 million humans? Israelis Israeli Arabs, Israeli Jews, Palestinians in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza. What is the future? I mean, even now, with the prospects of a two-state solution, more appropriate for a galaxy far, far away than back here on planet Earth, I would still argue to you that history, reality, demography, psychology, politics mandates that any solution be driven by a negotiated separation. There is no way before October 7th, and certainly no way after, that Israelis and Palestinians, those living between the river and the sea, can coexist and live happily ever after under one roof. It cannot be. There is Cyprus, Lebanon. There is no model. There's no precedent in modern history for a national movement seeking to become a state. And I'm assuming that under the circumstances of a negotiation, if I were an Israeli and I'm not, I would never be serious about meeting any Palestinian demands unless I was faced with one gun, one authority, and one negotiating position. We can talk all day long about Israeli transgressions, settlement activity, land confiscation, targeted and killings, closures. The one thing that is missing on the other side is a monopoly over the forces of violence within Palestinian society. And we can sum up all the rationalizations, the excuses, and the justifications as to why the Palestinians cannot, will not, have not been able to produce one gun, one authority, one negotiating position. Without that, there's zero chance of separation through negotiations. And without an Israeli commitment to take seriously Palestinian concerns and needs and requirements on Jerusalem, on borders, it's critically important. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I just interviewed, and I'll send Janice the link. I interviewed the dean of the Princeton School, International Relations, Amani Jamal, and the dean of Columbia's SIPA, their public policy school, Karen Yahi Mila, an Israeli American, dean at Columbia, a Palestinian American, dean at Princeton. The 45 minutes of conversation between those two reinforced my conviction that, in effect, it is possible to have a dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians. This is Goethe's definition of a tragedy, competing justices. And the one thing that is missing, that is absolutely elemental and critical, if any of this is going to happen as the years roll on, is leaders. Leaders who are masters of their politics, not prisoners of their ideologies. Leaders who are prepared to do this because it makes sense for their respective peoples, not for political reasons, not to assuage or deflect pressure from the international community or the United States or somebody else. That's what it's going to take. And that's what we don't have. How you get there, I couldn't say, but I would close by saying the following. Maybe there's a certain amount of optimism in knowing that we cannot see what's before us. We don't know, and the arc of history bends in ways that are impossible for us to predict or divine. All we can do, and the only piece of unsolicited advice I would give everybody here, is to try your damnedest in every way you possibly can on this issue to try to see that the arc of history bends in the right direction.
Aaron David Miller, it's a real privilege to talk to you and to hear your extraordinary insights about what's going on in that part of the world and here in this country as well. So thank you very much for being with us.
Warren, thanks for your penetrating questions, and it was really terrific to see you again.
Good to see you as well. So don't forget, you in the audience, that the poll is going to appear on the screen again, and you're asked to, if you will, respond to it on the screen. Do some research into what kinds of programs we're going to have in the future. Thank you all very much for being with us. Have a good night. And don't forget that Adam Schiff will be on the program on Wednesday. I believe Larry Mantle, my good friend and colleague, Larry Mantle, is going to be talking with Adam Schiff. Have a good night.